It's a celebration of America's freedom. Welcome to the Mark Scaringi Show. The Mark Scaringi Show is your place for a weekly discussion on making America great again. The important political and legal issues of the day, a celebration of the Constitution, and traditional American values. Mark is a practicing attorney, a former senatorial candidate, a Donald J. Trump-endorsed delegate, and a defender of the Constitution. His goal? To put America first. And now, celebrating America's freedoms, here's attorney Mark Scaringi.
Well, good afternoon and welcome to the Mark Scaringi Show. This is your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism. This is where we talk about the important political and legal issues of the day from the perspective of putting America first. And welcome my listeners here on WHP 580 and iHeartRadio. And you can download the iHeartRadio app and listen to my show wherever you are, whenever you like. If you'd like to listen to prior podcasts of the show, read my bi-weekly columns on Penn Live, or take a look at some of the great merchandise we have, you can check out the markscaringishow.com website. And don't forget to subscribe to us on YouTube and Twitter and Facebook, and you can get updates from the show. And you can also comment live, and we'll try to read some of your comments live on Harrisburg 100 and the Mark Scaringi Show Facebook page and my own Facebook. And you can call in 717-540-0580. That's 717-540-0580. And let us know what you're thinking about the important political and legal issues of the day. Today we're talking about President Donald J. Trump's feud, his dispute with the Squad. It is, of course, generated all kinds of media attention throughout the country and around the world. He's got himself into a big tweet storm of massive global proportions, and it even has involved world leaders from Canada and the United Kingdom and Germany. So the president has the attention of the world once again. Trump started off with the tweet storm apparently directed at the Squad. Now, who are the Squad? The Squad is comprised of 4 congresswomen: Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, a Democrat from New York; Representative Rashida Tlaib, a Democrat from Michigan; Representative Ayanna Pressley, a Democrat from Massachusetts; and our favorite, Representative Ilhan Omar, a Democrat from Minnesota. What was the tweet that set it off? Well, the president tweeted, "Why don't they go back and help fix the totally broken and crime-infested places from which they came? Then come back and show us how." And the president has been defending that tweet ever since he initiated it. The president explaining that he's not forcing these congresswomen out of the country. Of course, he doesn't have the power to do so. He's not telling them to go back. He's not sending them back. He's just making sure they're aware of their right to return to their country of origin and fix those countries. And then come back and lecture the American people, show the American people the results of their good work. Now, of course, only one of the congresswomen actually has come from a foreign country, and that's Representative Ilhan Omar, the country of Somalia. So perhaps the president extrapolated her background to encompass incorrectly the background of the other 3 congresswomen. But nevertheless, the president believes he is onto something here, and he's going to stick to it. The national media, of course, has condemned him. The Democratic Party has condemned him. Even prominent Republicans, such as United States Senator Mitt Romney, the avowed never-Trumper representing the good people of Utah, has condemned the president. And our own Senator Pat Toomey, representing the good people of Pennsylvania, has also condemned the president for his tweet. And I would offer that perhaps the president was listening to the Mark Scaringi Show last week when we were talking about a similar issue on the issue of the Central American migration. That was the topic of our show last week. And I was talking about how the Central Americans who are on our U.S.-Mexican border are there largely on fraudulent and false asylum claims. Because, of course, they are not fleeing religious or political persecution. They're simply leaving their country of origin, their country of birth, because they don't like it there. There aren't enough jobs. There's not enough infrastructure. It's not clean. It's not healthy. There are gangs involved in those countries that These migrants have then left their country and are coming to ours and want to come into ours under these false asylum claims. And so we posed the question last week, why don't these Central American migrants, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of them, why don't they just stay in their home country and try to fix it and make it better? They're complaining that there aren't enough jobs in Honduras or El Salvador or Guatemala, or that parts of their country are ridden with criminal gangs. So the idea we posed last week was, why not stay in your country of your birth, where you were born and raised, where your family and your neighbors live and reside, and why not make your country a better place in which to live? And that generated lots of calls here on the Mark Scaringi Show. And perhaps the president was listening. We don't know. It's possible. But perhaps the president picked up on that theme, focusing in on Representative Ilhan Omar, who, of course, was born in Somalia. And Somalia is probably the worst failed state on earth today. It's really hardly even a country. It has suffered from military dictatorship or under military dictatorship for decades now. It is crime-ridden. It is impoverished. There is a near complete lack of infrastructure. It is ruled by military autocrats and clans. It's actually divided in segments by clan. And I know this is kind of a foreign word for the American people, but in Somalia, it's the Somali tribe, and they have various clans that comprise the tribe. And so the clans are fighting for control of the overall country of Somalia. It's been that way for about 1,000 or 2,000 years. We've had intermittent periods of European colonialism, namely the most importantly the British and the Italians, who colonized large parts of Somalia. But it's a horrible place in which to live, and that's why Ilhan Omar's family fled Somalia. So the president is looking at the background of Ilhan Omar, and he is reacting to her constant condemnation and criticism of America and of American principles and American values, and talking about the systemic and endemic racism here in America. And he's wondering, well, if America is so bad, why did your family come here, and why wouldn't you go back to your home country if America is such a hellhole as Representative Ilhan Omar would have us believe? So that seems to me what the president is saying, and Omar has every right to return to her native land and try to bring about a significant improvement for the Somali people. But sure as I'm sitting here today, there's not a chance that she'll do that. She'll continue to reside in the United States. She'll continue to be a member of the United States Congress, and she will continue to lecture the American people on the failure of our great country. And that really has gotten the president's ire, so to speak, and he's fighting back the way many American patriots are fighting back against Ilhan Omar. We'll talk more about the president versus the squad when we return from this brief commercial break. You're listening to The Mark Scaringi Show.
Now, more of Mark Scaringi on News Radio WHP 580.
And welcome back to The Mark Scaringi Show, your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism here on WHP 580 AM and the iHeartRadio station. You can call in 717-540-0580. That's 717-540-0580. You can check us out on Harrisburg 100 Facebook Live and comment live. You can also check us out on my Facebook page and make a comment, and we'll try to respond or call in and let us know your thoughts. We're talking about President Trump versus the Squad, and how it's possible that the president, before he sent that tweet, perhaps he was listening to the Mark Scaringi show, because we were talking about this topic last night. The members of the Squad, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Representative Ilhan Omar, and others, have been castigating the president for his policies on the U.S.-Mexican border, calling the president's policies inhumane, racist, and all of those pejoratives. And the president fighting back and sending out the tweet, why don't you go back and help fix the totally broken and crime-infested places from which they came? Then come back and show us how. And apparently the president directing his ire at Ilhan Omar, or perhaps he's talking more broadly about the Central American countries that the migrants who are so loudly defended by the Squad come from. And that's what we were talking about last week, and how the Central American migrants, if they don't like the countries from which they come, El Salvador, Guatemala, Nicaragua, Mexico, and others, why don't they work hard in their own towns and communities and neighborhoods to make them clean and safe? And why don't they try to start businesses and build factories and create jobs? Why don't they work on their own infrastructure? Why don't they fight corruption in their own governments? Why don't they fight back against gangs and violence? Instead, they just flee, and they come here, or they try to come in here in violation of our immigration laws and our asylum laws. And so the president's very frustrated about this. There's a humanitarian crisis on our border because of this gross abuse of our asylum laws. These individuals are not fleeing political, religious persecution in their home countries. So the president, at wit's end, fights back against the Squad, who are some of the loudest champions of these migrants, saying that they should be able to come into the United States simply because they want to, just because they want a better life. But that's what an immigrant does, and an immigrant has to go through all of the hoops and hurdles that all other immigrants from countries across the world have to do to come into our country legally. But the Squad, they don't want that for Central Americans. They want Central Americans to be able to come right in to our country. And the president fights back. Now, Ilhan Omar, it turns out, is the only member of the Squad who actually comes from a foreign country, the foreign country of Somalia. And let's talk a little bit, and the president is saying, why don't they go back and help fix the totally broken and crime-infested places from which they came, then come back and show us how. So let's talk a little bit about Somalia and the story of Representative Ilhan Omar, the Democrat from Minnesota. If you read the popular press, they'll talk about how she was born in Somalia, raised partly in Somalia, and then spent time in a refugee camp in Kenya before being admitted into the United States through the U.S. Refugee Resettlement Program. Now, one word about the U.S. Refugee Resettlement Program. It is a program that is sponsored by the United States government, supported by U.S. taxpayers. And so Omar really benefited from the largesse and generosity of the American people and the U.S. government. There's no requirement that the United States have a resettlement program in the first place. The Constitution does not compel or require the federal government to maintain a refugee resettlement program. But the American people, through their lawmakers at some point in time, decided that that would be the appropriate thing to do. And so we've had the refugee resettlement program for many years. And Ilhan Omar and her family benefited greatly from that program. So the president is thinking, why isn't Ilhan Omar, why isn't she grateful to be here in America? to be brought here into America at the cost of the U.S. taxpayers, brought into our country, allowed to become a citizen of the greatest country on the face of the earth. And Ilhan Omar is flourishing in America. She is elected to the United States Congress, represents the people of the 5th Congressional District in Minnesota. Omar now has a huge salary, $175,000. She has the best benefits anywhere in the world. She will be taken care of for the rest of her life. She will go on to become extraordinarily wealthy, as most politicians do. Her offices are all paid for by the taxpayers. Her communications are all paid for by the U.S. taxpayers. It's a beautiful life that Ilhan Omar is now living as a direct result of the beneficence of the American people. Yet Ilhan Omar has launched a near constant attack on the American people, calling us racists, talking about America suffering from systemic racism and engaged in humanitarian abuses on our border and throughout our country, talking about how we marginalize minority groups here in America. It's a sad tale being told by Ilhan Omar about America and the American people. And the president's wondering, well, what's it like in Somalia, where Ilhan Omar comes from? Well, she was born in Mogadishu in 1982, and that was purportedly the capital of Somalia, but there wasn't much of a government in place. It was crime-ridden. The government, of course, was corrupt, and there was war. And it's interesting, if you listen to an interview of Omar, she'll talk about her time in Somalia, and she'll talk about the time when the war came. And it's an interesting way, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later in the show. But we hear so much. Her family fled Somalia, went to the Dadaab refugee camp in Kenya near the Somali border. It also goes by another name, but we hear so much about Omar's status as a refugee, as if we are to admire Omar for being a refugee as a little girl. There's no question that her country was a disaster. Why else was her family fleeing it? The country of Somalia is comprised 100% of Muslims. And the Muslim tribes, the clans within the Somali tribe, have been fighting each other for power and control, as they have been doing for centuries. It's not new or unusual. It is a part of the history of Somalia. And her family left and took her with them. And I wonder, how is that an accomplishment by Omar? How is that something that she has achieved in her life, being just transported by her parents away from her country to a refugee camp? It's just a little girl being relocated by her family. And I wonder, what life lessons can we draw from Omar's family's flight from their home country? Now, what skills and experiences does Ilhan Omar bring to the United States Congress? Well, she describes herself as a community organizer, a community educator, and a community activist. To me, that sounds a lot like former President Barack Obama. But that's it. Those are her skills, purportedly, and her experiences. She's not a professional. She doesn't have any advanced degrees. She's never owned a business. She's not a business owner. She's never employed one person. It's not even clear that she's ever been a worker. It's not even clear that she's ever held a job. I'm not sure that a community organizer is a job. How many of you have ever hired a community organizer to do anything? Let's say you turn on the shower in the morning and there's no water coming out of the faucet. Do you call a plumber or a community organizer? Your child gets sick. Do you call a doctor or a community organizer? So, Ilhan Omar, a self described community organizer, it's not even evident that she has ever worked. Yet we are to admire her and ennoble her. Why? Because she was born in Somalia and became a refugee because her parents took her to a refugee camp in Kenya. Is that it? Is that her great accomplishment? In this same interview that I was watching of her, she thanked her grandfather who taught her the importance of representative democracy, and it's the responsibility of leaders to build a better community than the one they see. Now, her grandfather was a Somali tribesman who had no experience with representative democracy, and her family did not stay in Somalia to build a better community. Her family fled and into the arms ultimately of the U.S. taxpayers to get out of that destitute and degraded country that she came from. So it's just odd that she would talk about her grandfather stressing the importance of representative democracy when Somalia has never had one. And in fact, the real representative democracy, the republic here in the United States, has been here for 240 years. I mean, we, the American people, we've got it figured out. Our forefathers, all the way back to the founding fathers of this country, they figured out representative democracy, and they've done it quite well. It's odd that we would get a lesson on representative democracy from the granddaughter of a Somali tribesman. More about the dispute between President Trump and the Squad when we return from this brief commercial break. You're listening to The Mark Scaringi Show.
Now, more of Mark Scaringi on News Radio WHP 580.
And welcome back to The Mark Scaringi Show, your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism. We're talking today about President Trump versus the Squad and the tweet that launched 1,000 denunciations from Democrats, liberals, the media, and even foreign leaders around the world when the president suggested that members of the Squad, they can leave America and go back to the crime-ridden and crime-infested places they come from, fix those places, and then come back and then teach Americans how to make and build a great country. And the president certainly has a point. We're talking about the biographical story of Representative Ilhan Omar, the Muslim American representing the people from the 5th Congressional District in Minnesota. And she has made a series of comments talking about the systemic racism and of America and the American people and the systemic injustice that she has confronted here in America, and the president getting a little bit tired of her constant condemnation of America and the American people, and suggesting, go back to the country from which you came, fix that country, that's a disaster, and then come back and teach us how you accomplished the greatness of Somalia. And I'm going through an interview I watched Representative Ilhan Omar give, and she was talking about how she was growing up in Somalia in the 1980s. And she claims it was thriving, normal, a very pleasant environment to grow up in. Now, do any of you believe that Mogadishu was thriving, normal, and very pleasant to grow up in the 80s? Of course not. This is just the way Omar speaks. It's manufactured. Everything, it seems to me, so much of what she says is a half-truth. And then she says, when the war started. Now, when the war started, you might be thinking of Napoleon invading Russia, or some grand war between nation states. No. This was just yet another iteration of the eternal civil clan wars that have been going on in Somalia for time immemorial. It's one clan versus another. And the Klansmen, they get their guns and their machetes, and they go out and they kill members of the other clan. That's what we're talking about. So that's what really happened when she says, when the war started. And she recounts how she woke up at midnight to militiamen, she refers to them as militiamen, surrounding their house. And these men were classmates of her aunt and her older sister. They went to school together one day, but the next day these boys are surrounding the Omar house with guns, threatening to kill her and her entire family. Again, these were classmates of her sister and her aunt. All of a sudden turned into a gang of killers who were trying to break into her house and assassinate her entire family. So why? Omar doesn't tell us in any of her stories about this very significant event in her life. It's a mystery. I mean, how many of you living in communities throughout central Pennsylvania, throughout the country, have all of a sudden awakened, and the schoolboys in your town all have guns. They're a member of the militia, and they are threatening to assassinate you and your entire family. How many times has this happened to you in America? And it seems to me a pretty significant thing. But no one who interviews Omar asks her why. How can this be? It's like when she was speaking to the Council of American Islamic Relations, and she talked about how that on 9/11, somebody did something. Somebody did something on 9/11. Well, who and what? It turns out the who were radical Islamist terrorists. The what is they viciously attacked innocent Americans, killing 3,000 of them on 9/11. That's the who and the what. And so she doesn't explain the whole story. She gives you her slanted side. Now, those schoolboys of hers who one day had pencils and tablets in their hands, the next day had Kalashnikov rifles and had surrounded her home in Mogadishu, threatening to assassinate her entire family, they're just members of a different clan. That's it. And it would just be wonderful if a member of the media would report this, or if Omar would just say, you know what, Somalia, great country, I love my homeland, but it's a tribal-based country, a clan-based country. And the clans have been fighting and butchering each other for 2,000 years. And it doesn't seem like it's getting any better. In fact, it's just about the worst place on earth. The highest crime rates, the highest disease rates, no infrastructure, bombed out cities, all different kinds of mercenary armies roaming the streets. That's the way it has been for hundreds of years. So, we, the good people of Somalia, we didn't get it figured out. I mean, we didn't work it out. We didn't make a great Somalia. So our ideas, when Omar was a young girl in Somalia, it was run by a military dictator. It was a socialist Islamist state. So she grew up under socialism. She grew up under Islam. So if she fled because she feared for her life because her family was surrounded by local schoolboys with rifles who were threatening to assassinate them, she doesn't say why, but the reason is because they were from a different clan, so they were killing people who were not in their clan. That's the way it goes in Somalia in the 90s, in the 1990s. I'm not talking about the 990s. I'm talking about the 1990s. That's the way it is. That's where she comes from. So why doesn't she explain it that way? Why doesn't she say, my goodness, the place that I came from was a hellhole, and America is a heaven compared to that. When I was in Mogadishu, we didn't have running water. We didn't have indoor plumbing. We didn't have many roads and bridges and schools. It was a war zone. There was ethnic cleansing. Clans were killing each other because of their they didn't belong to the same clan. It was run by a socialist military dictator. It was a horrible place. But America is a wonderful place. You would think that she would say something like that. But no, all we get is how horrible America is. You know, then you don't have to wonder why the president gets so worked up about the barrage of criticism that he receives from Ilhan Omar. The war that she speaks of is a long-established tribal war. And America got itself involved in Somalia. Remember the George H.W. Bush, the do-gooder-in-chief. He saw the images on television in the early 1990s and the latest civil conflict between the clans in Mogadishu and Somalia had erupted. So George H.W. Bush, the good, he decides he's going to do good in Somalia. So he sends in the U.S. Rangers. He sends in the U.S. soldiers to provide humanitarian relief, airlifts of food and supplies to Somalia. And, of course, Somali Klansmen, maybe the same ones who put rifles in Ilhan Omar's face and threatened to shoot her, they shot down 2 U.S. helicopters. And remember that, resulting in the deaths of 18 U.S. Army Rangers. The heated battle that ensued on the streets of Mogadishu. Remember Black Hawk Down? It became a big major motion picture. And after George H.W. Bush finally had enough, actually it was the next president, it was Bill Clinton, who finally had enough and pulled U.S. troops out of Somalia. It cost the American taxpayers $1.7 billion. It caused 43 U.S. soldiers to lose their lives. 143 were wounded. All because the United States tried to do good for the people of Somalia, to provide humanitarian relief and assistance to Ilhan Omar and her family. And what does Omar say in response? Does she say thank you to the American people? Thank you for trying to provide us food and water. Thank you for trying to intervene and stop the centuries of tribal and ethnic cleansing and conflict that has bedeviled Somalia. Did she say any of those things? No. Instead, she condemned the United States for killing Somalis. Think about that. That is her response. So the President Trump is saying there is nothing the United States can do that will ever satisfy someone like Representative Ilhan Omar. We'll talk more about the dispute between the President and the Squad when we return from this brief commercial break. You're listening to The Mark Scaringi Show.
Let's get back to The Mark Scaringi Show on News Radio WHP 580.
And welcome back to the Mark Scaringi Show, your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism. This is where we talk about the important political and legal issues of the day from the perspective of putting America first. The issue today, President Trump versus the Squad. And are the members of the Squad putting America first? That's a good question. The president apparently doesn't think so. And I've talked a lot about the biography and the history of Somalia, the native land from which Ilhan Omar comes. And we'll talk, and I must apologize to our listeners and viewers on the various Facebook pages. It looks like perhaps it's too hot and humid out there for those connections to stay, but those are down. But you're welcome to call in on WHP 580, 717-540-0580, and we'll open up the phone booth and we'll take some of your questions or comments. Steve from Hershey, you're on the Mark Scaringi Show.
How you doing today?
I'm doing well, Steve. How are you?
Not bad. Hey, you talked about history, but you failed to mention American history.
Yes.
You didn't talk about how many times the Native Indians might have told the white man to go back where they came from.
Well, I think they often did.
Particularly since the fact that they came here mad at the British, dumped the tea in the harbor up there in Boston, and they could have went on back and changed their homeland the way they wanted it to be. But no, they decided to make war with the people who were already here. That's why I think the president is wrong. Okay?
So we should
look at the history of America and say, you know what? There's times in our history when people would have said, go back to Europe, and we didn't.
Yeah, so Steve from Hershey, and Hershey's a beautiful town, built by Milton S. Hershey. Should we give Hershey back to the Iroquois?
I think Hershey did a lot to make up for a lot of things.
Okay.
I think I'd give Hershey a pass.
Yeah.
Well, I'm a little biased because I'm in Hershey.
Yeah, it's a beautiful place.
But Milton Hershey is a lot better than Donald Trump. Milton Hershey built schools for people, built hospitals for people.
Yeah, well, didn't Milton Hershey, he built that wonderful boys' school, but didn't he not allow blacks into his school?
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. I'm not saying that he's perfect.
So Milton Hershey is a racist. So perhaps we should tear down Hershey Park. But what about my earlier question, Steve?
Question for you. No, question for you.
Yes.
Did you ever hear Milton Hershey tell blacks to stay out of Hershey?
I've never heard Milton Hershey say anything. He was dead long before I was born. But let me ask you, if English colonists came to this new world that was an old world in the eyes of the indigenous peoples and took the land from them, which is exactly what they did, and you believe that is a moral wrong, then let's rectify it. Let's make restitution, and let's give Hershey back to the Iroquois. What do you think?
Okay, if you want to do that, that's okay with me, because you can't own the land.
All right. Well, let's start with your house. Okay. Let's start with your house.
Well, I can move my house. Okay. You don't own the land. You know that? You know you can't own the land in Hershey?
I can't.
You're a lawyer, you know that.
All right.
You're a lawyer, you know that. You know in Hershey you can't own the property. You can only own your house, not the land.
Really?
That's true.
Wow, that's fascinating. Steve from Hershey. Steve from Hershey, thanks for calling. Appreciate having the benefit of your views. Let's talk.
Okay.
Let's talk to John from York. You're on the Mark Scaringi Show. What do you think about this dispute between the president and the squad?
Well, I want to say it's nice to talk to you again.
Nice to have you on the show.
Sure, I listen every week, whether I agree or not. Maybe I'll learn something.
All right, what's on your mind today?
Okay, now this is it. I think it was cruel, and I hope not racist. I hate to call people that because it's such a terrible, serious thing. Maybe you could inform me better if you know the president, whether he is that way or not. But I think it was cruel and racist to tell this woman to go back to her original country, and the others too, because they are citizens of this country. And whether you agree with all their ideas or not, they're probably just trying to eliminate injustice and racism in our nation and trying to improve it. And I kind of agree with a lot of what they say about the border crisis. I think people could be treated with a lot more compassion down there, the immigrants.
Yeah, the president did not tell Omar and the rest of the members of the squad to leave the country. He didn't tell them to go back. He said they can. They can go back. And what's wrong with that? Why can't we have immigration in reverse? I mean, the liberal progressives are all about globalism and borderless. They want to tear down the borders. So just move around the world and just go to Somalia and be a Somali or whatever there. Why is that such a pejorative if the president says, if you don't like America, leave America. Go somewhere else where you're going to be happy. And maybe Ilhan Omar will be happy in Somalia.
It just sounds a lot like white nationalism, which I am totally against, and white supremacy.
Yeah, but what's white about it? I mean, I don't understand the racist. How is it racist?
Well, that's what I'm asking you. Do you know, is the president does he have racist tendencies? It sounds like he does. Now, am I wrong? I mean, I don't want to accuse someone if it's not true.
Well, what is racism? What is racism?
Well, racism is looking down on other people or treating them differently because of color or nationality. And that crowd.
Well, doesn't it mean doesn't it mean that you believe that some races are superior and some races are inferior based upon the genetic code and the biology of the race? Isn't that what racism is?
That would be part of racism. Yes, it's terrible.
And is that what the president said to Ilhan Omar? Did he say, "I, as a white descendant of Scottish people, I am a superior race to the race of the Somalis"? Is that what he was saying? Did you hear those words?
I hope and pray not. No. I hope and pray not. And that crowd, though, that kept yelling in North Carolina, "Send her back," that was terrible. I mean, that to me was very ignorant. I think he should have stopped that, and yet he encouraged it.
Well, he did disavow those chants immediately afterwards.
Well, yeah. Well, I hope. I'm just concerned. I just, as I've said, I believe we should love everybody, regardless of race, color, creed. Martin Luther King was right. Judge people by the content of their character, not the color of their skin. And anything that even borders on racism, I just hate.
Well, what can Ilhan Omar teach the American people about racism?
Well, she could certainly teach us about what it's like to live in a terrible, war-infested, horrible place and want to be out of it.
Yeah, and why was it terrible and war-infested? What is it about Somalia that it's been such a horrible place for so long?
Well, I'll tell you, it's I guess, it is the warlords. At the same time, when we realize how horrible it is, we should be trying to help those
but the warlords represent clans, right? So Somalia is divided by the clan system. I'm not talking about the Ku Klux Klan. I'm talking talking about clans within the Somali tribe. So
even if it's a rough, hard place to live.
Isn't
we have to realize that Omar has the right to still love her nation? I mean,
isn't that an example of ethnic strife? Isn't that an example of racism, of hatred for a people because they're in a different clan than yours? One day, Omar was going to school with some wonderful schoolboys. That night at midnight, they were surrounding her house with Kalashnikovs, threatening to assassinate her entire family. Why? Because the Omars were members of a different clan. Yeah. So maybe Omar can teach us of the horrors of racism.
Right.
Right, and ethnocentrism. And putting one's ethnicity and tribe and clan above all others and killing others because they don't belong to the same clan. Maybe that's what Omar could teach us because she has actual direct experience with it. But she hasn't uttered a word about it. Not a word.
Well, what we hear on the news and so forth isn't always the complete. I honestly think that these women in this so-called squad love this country. They just want to improve it. They want to make it better.
Yeah, maybe the good people of Somalia have a real problem with racism, tribalism, clanism.
Oh, there's racism everywhere.
It's certainly in Somalia. They're killing each other over it. Right?
Yeah, there's racism worldwide.
And that's why Omar and her family fled. They fled Somalia because of the ethnic-based clan wars.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I think we should.
So maybe we Americans could teach Ilhan Omar something about having a country that is not based upon ethnicity, clanism, tribalism. Not based upon race.
We could learn from her. She could learn from us.
I'm not so sure what I can learn from Ilhan Omar. I've listened to her for 2 years now. She hasn't taught me one thing. That's what I'm trying to figure out.
I don't know. I think she's an intelligent woman, and she came from terrible circumstances, and she could teach us a lot. And I think she's just trying to make this country better. I don't think she's the terrible person some people think she is. I think she's, she probably loves us, and
I'm sure
we
she
should
does.
respect her more.
I'm sure she does. John, let me get one more call in here. John from York, thanks for
thank
calling.
you.
Appreciate having the
Sure.
benefit of your views. And let's take one quick last quick call. Judy from Camp Hill, you've got about 30 seconds. What are your thoughts on the Trump versus the Squad dispute?
Hey, Mark. I'm glad I have a few seconds with you. What you just spoke, how you just spoke, you were eloquent in how you spoke about Omar and the Squad and all, and you're just right on in your expressions of what they are actually doing to not only themselves but to America. They're not helping us. They're hurting us. They're not trying to help us.
Well, this is a great call, Judy. You have a lot of wonderful things to say. Perhaps one of our smartest callers. Judy, we're running out of time. Thank Judy from Camp Hill. Thanks for calling. Appreciate having you on the show. We're just about out of time. I want to thank you all for listening. Tune in every Saturday, 1 o'clock, to talk about the important political and legal issues of the day here on The Mark Scaringi Show.